or perchance I may colloquially employ.
Anti-deflections will be heard after the lunch break.
Patrick Klepek, let's talk about Severance, Season 2, Episode 5, Trojan's Horse. Any overall thoughts of the episode, Patrick?
Solid. It's like has all the feelings of we're in the middle of a season, like thoroughly enjoyable episode. But I mean, this season has been on like strapped onto a rocket ship. And that first episode was like get the band get together, and then we've had just a string of like really interesting, explosive season finale style kind of revelations and moments. And here, I think it's a little bit more of like settling down, and I'm glad, because as much as I like a show that is confident and willing to like use like seasoned like defining moments early on, you also need, it's only 10 episodes. Like characters need a chance to reflect and compress, and the audience needs a chance to like compress and reflect. And I think this episode functioned really well as a sort of a like okay, deep breath. Let's like think about what happened before we move on to what's next. So in that sense, it doesn't have the same juice that we've had so far, but still a really enjoyable episode as we watch our characters digest like a lot of the really messed up stuff that has happened to them so far this season.
Yeah, I think this was a nice transitional episode. Definitely feels like an in-between episode where you're setting some pieces up. But there's still some really nice moments in it and some really great direction. So solid episode, not one of my favorites, but good stuff with it. Let's talk about what happens in the episode. In the opening scene, a man in a white lab coat pushes a cart down the hallway. He meets up with Felicia and another colleague from optics and design. And he asks the question, do you have them? They open a tray of dental-looking tools and hand them off to him. He puts them on his cart and takes them to the exports, right? What it's called, right? The exports hall.
Mm-hmm.
And then takes the elevator down, and it's very sinister. And that's the opening scene. No real information given. The man's face is very notably obstructed for the entire film. We don't see his face for the whole time. So it's
I'm waiting for, because we watched these episodes early, and I was like, but there's a shot where like the quote clearest shot we get is at the end of a hallway as a door closes.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting for Reddit to do its work, like enhance, like what can we learn from this long shot that is the closest.
We hear his voice, and it's not a character that I personally recognize, but hey, if you know decodingtv@gmail.com, let us know. So the guy, when he's pushing the cart, he is whistling a song called The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. For those who don't know, that song chronicles the final voyage of the Edmund Fitzgerald as it succumbed to a massive late season storm and sank in Lake Superior with the loss of all 29 crewmen.
Do you just know this?
Well, I watched the show with subtitles on, and it says like, "Hey, whistling Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald," and then I looked up Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald on Wikipedia, and then that's where I found that definition.
So that makes more sense than like, wow, you're really just sitting on that one.
But I should have just said that. I should have just said yes, Patrick.
Wow, really insulting, Patrick. Like, and also you don't know the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Not a man of literature.
Anyway, who knows what the significance of that? It seems ominous. Put that out there.
There's a lot of that whole intro scene. Feels like we're getting a glimpse of the end of the season there, like a culminate. Like that door, I think very obviously is going to play a huge role. Like you get the vibes that whatever is the heist equivalent, for this season, if that's the direction we go with the finale, it seems like it's going to involve that door.
I agree. And hopefully we'll get some more answers by the end of the season about what's going on there. We cut to Mark S. By the way, we have a lot of answers this episode about reintegration, Patrick Klepek. Like, what's become very clear is reintegration happens in phases. It doesn't just all happen at once. And that Mark, as of this point, is still severed. Like, he still has like an outie and an innie, and they both have distinct experiences. So anyway, worth noting.
What's in the little bottles? What's in the goo?
Yeah, unclear.
It looks gross, though. Looks upsetting to drink.
Indeed. It's also you also see the goo in the opening credits as well. So he has these little bottles of goo I mean, it feels evocative of some kind of milk, from some creature of some kind.
The goats?
Anyway,
The
yeah,
goats?
the goats? Maybe, who knows? Mark is taking a bunch of pills. He's drinking this weird milk-like substance, presumably to adjust to reintegration, I should say. And he's on the phone with Devin. It's clear she doesn't know about the reintegration. Ragabi shows up. She's living with Mark. She's just chilling with him, staying there. So
he seems psyched about it.
Yeah.
Like really happy to see her walk in the door.
Yeah.
There is like strong roommate who keeps saying they're going to move out in a couple of months, but they're still around. And when she comes in and says you should get your dryer fixed, like I feel like most people at one point in their life have had a roommate like that. Like, the whole dynamic here would be better if you weren't here. But I do need your rent money. And he needs reintegration. So he's just sort of stuck.
There's two things you need most from a roommate: rent money and reintegration.
And the smoothie goo that's made in the morning. Where is she making it? Anyway, sorry. In the kitchen?
Yeah. All right. At Lumon, Helena meets with Drummond and Natalie to debrief on the situation. They decide they're not going to tell her father what happened at the Ortbo, but they say
hold on. That seems like the show moves past that pretty quickly, but I found that interesting that they would make that decision on their own to not pass on information about, like, because he doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that would not want to know. Like, do you think he would want to know? Probably, but they're like them not telling him, I think is. I wonder if stuff like that will have ramifications, like how much is actually feeding up to the top of the food. Like, I thought that was interesting that they made a note of, no, we're not going to trouble him with this information.
Let me give you some insight into the corporate world, Patrick. Which is
they don't want to get in trouble.
a huge part of being successful in the corporate world, in my opinion, this is just Dave Chen's opinion, is figuring out what is important enough to tell your boss. Right? And like there's always this like situation you're navigating of, okay, well, like if we can just fix this problem, then like maybe the boss doesn't even need to know about it, right?
That makes sense. I'm just surprised this is not a corporate structure that suggests people with agency. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very, and so I'm just that was the only part that sort of.
I actually don't know if I agree with that. I think actually, like in this episode, we saw like Milchick was given lots of latitude,
or I guess rather,
to make decisions.
The contours of what the agency is. Like, it's something the show has spent a lot of time in season 2 defining in a way that was much more mysterious in season 1. So now I think it's interesting when you find out what people decide is their job and how they share or choose to not share information. I think is a interesting. Like, we don't know much of the corporate structure still, but at least like we're learning. Season 2 is way more about the inner like the lives of the people within Lumon that are like working within it in a really interesting way.
It's always this very tricky navigation because if you decide to tell them, it's like, okay, they might be unhappy. But the worst case situation is if you don't tell them and then they hear about it from somewhere else and they're like, why didn't you tell me this? Right? Like, that's like the worst case scenario. So
I guess that's part of why I pointed it out. I expect that to happen. Like, I expect that to happen.
They clearly think they can contain the situation. But I think that like it does. There is many sort of things about corporate America that I really appreciated that this episode brought to light. And that's one of them. It's just like sometimes you don't tell your boss about the calamitous Ortbo because you have a fix, you think you can resolve it, you think it will cause more damage. Like sometimes it's like you don't tell the boss because it will actually create more problems than it solves. Right? Because it's like, okay, they're gonna get activated, and then it's not gonna, and then they will involve themselves in a way that actually isn't helpful in this situation. So I'm just speaking hypothetically. Of course, I would never. No. I always tell my boss 100% of everything. I'm just saying, like, what I've heard from people who would not do what I do. That's what I'm referring to.
Noted.
Thank you. Okay, so they decide that Mark is 81% of the way towards completing Cold Harbor as of Friday, and so therefore they cannot endanger Cold Harbor. So they have to send Helena back down into the severed floor. She is not happy. about that because she's like, "Hey, that innie tried to kill me, and then my innie tried to kill me. Like these innies are trying to kill me. I can't go down there." She's like, "I'm you know what? I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna fake it again." And then Natalie says, "We can't take that risk. Sorry, you're not good enough at faking it." So yeah, and Drummond says Mark S won't work without her, and the work is mysterious and important.
And the work is mysterious and important.
So we must give him her. The board appreciates her sacrifice. So
What a good line. What
Yes.
a good line.
the work is a very meta commentary on what's going on in Severance.
No one can just. Well, it's in some ways it almost feels. I don't know if it goes this deep, but like, a show like this only exists in reaction to like shows that have come before it and how they've chosen to do. Sort of like mystery box storytelling, and sometimes lines like that sort of crack me up because it's like the common complaint in shows like this is people
Right.
just don't say what they mean or won't ask obvious questions. And I couldn't help but chuckle at that line in particular. It was like, that just feels like somebody being cheeky about the way characters can't just say what they mean in shows where this would all be solved, resolved very quickly if someone just said what they meant.
It does raise this idea of what if they don't even understand what Cold Harbor is, like, or if Cold Harbor actually isn't important. It's the idea of Cold Harbor, because theoretically at this meeting, as you indicate, Patrick, they could just like you would just say what Cold Harbor is, right? Like you would just say it out loud.
Yeah,
right?
this is a brain trust that in theory
Yes,
is
everyone should
all
know.
on the level.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, Helly R shows up on the severed floor. You really start to see the difference between Helena and Helly R, like in terms of Britt Lower's performance in this episode, and it's really incredible what she's able to accomplish.
The way that she, my wife pointed this out. She's like, the way she, and like Adam Scott has talked about like some of the physicality he does in his performance, and I can't say that I've thought I noticed other than like the difference in Helena and Helly R, like standing up straight a little bit. Like I noticed stuff like that, but here I wonder if she's exaggerating it a little bit because we're getting kind of snapped into place between these characters. But like there's a moment where Mark and her are like walking down the hallway, and she's like, the way she like hunches her shoulders as she's like walking fast, it's just so different than her Audi in a profound way. And
she looks like she's about to like take off on a 100-meter dash when she gets out of the elevator. It's very pronounced.
Now, but Grant, if you remember, if you piece together what her lived experience has been for, like, we don't know between last episode and this episode, when did she snap back to being the Audi, right? Like she gets like what time has passed? I guess she's in Irving's arms and then snaps into the elevator, right? Is that her
she's
last?
In Mark's arms.
Mark's arms,
yes. Yeah. Well, that's one of the strangest things about the show is, like, logistically, how does any of the stuff from last episode happen? Right? Because, so Irving's Audi is just in the middle of the forest, but then he's out there with the innies, right? And so how did they get Irving back to Lumon? How did they get the innies back to Lumon? Who is hiking back to base? Right? Is it the innie or the Audi? Because none of them seem to have any memory of that.
No, yeah, we learn with Irving's Audi later, like he's informed of being fired in like an incident, but it certainly indicates no memory of like trekking through the forest.
Right. So it raises all these questions of, okay, was what we saw actually real? Was it in the forest? Was it some kind of projection of some kind?
I don't know. The way they talk about it in the performance review, though, really made it seem like
a real
Milchick go to the forest
thing.
And everyone really agrees it was a bad idea now, but we let Milchick do it.
Yeah. Another alternative is we talked about how there's like other states beyond just innie and Audi. Maybe there's some other kind of like third state of like we're traveling to the Orpo state. Like there's like another partition of where they don't remember any of those things.
Sort of a neutral state.
Yeah, who knows? Catatonic state. Who knows? Anyway,
right.
So, but suffice to say, a lot of questions for me about what's happening in between these episodes.
I agree,
and that it's very unclear. Okay. So Helly R shows up on the severed floor, meets Miss Wong for the first time. The three remaining innies meet up with Milchick, who explains that Irving's gone for good. His Audi is on an elongated cruise voyage. And also, the reason why Helena Egan was down there infiltrating as her innie was conducting valuable research. He talks about the Grokshupin. I'm reading here from the Hans India online. History records that for various reasons, monarchs have on occasion traveled incognito among their subjects. These reasons range from security and fact-finding to idle amusement. According to Swedish legend, Charles the 11th, the King of Sweden, traveled around the country dressed as a farmer or a simple traveler to discover and identify corruption and oppression against the populace, end quote. So this is a real thing, not just the thing that Milchick made up, like that's the tallest waterfall in the world. The Grokshupin is an actual historic thing in a historical basis. Some nice moments here where all the innies are really distressed and Helly is in disbelief. She says, "Are you saying she was down here as me?" And Mark says, "Maybe she still is." Very damning. Very damning. She has completely lost his trust. And to be fair, if you had sex with someone and then found out that they were a different person, that would be pretty rough. You would not be happy with that. Anyway. Like you'd feel like what even is my knowledge of this person? And in fact,
and also
later,
how would you explain how do you explain that to the even just explaining it would feel like there's a violation of consent in even just explaining the logistics of what even if these two innies, nobody did anything wrong. They were manipulated and exploited by an outsider, but it would leave you with, I can't I'm glad it didn't go unaddressed, and becomes a real fixture of this episode, because that moment in particular is it's so profoundly dark,
violating,
and violating that it's violation on both sides. It's a lack of consent on both sides that is just unique to the premise of this show.
Helly and Mark discuss it in the bathroom. She's disappointed Mark couldn't tell that Helly wasn't herself, and she asks, "What was she like?" And Mark says, "Like you, or you're like her. I don't know who you are, I guess."
You're like her? I don't know. I don't know who you are, I guess.
Is what he says, which is very profound statement of I thought I knew who you were. I thought I would be able to tell if it was an imposter, but I guess I didn't know.
His turn is a little, I don't know, and this, happens for a decent chunk of the episode. The personality change that he undergoes or adopts, I guess, to deal with the trauma of the previous episode was, I don't know. I guess I had trouble buying it even for Mark. As it didn't strike me as the way Mark would deal with a situation like that, and the extent that it goes on throughout the episode. I don't know. It was just it was an interesting character choice to play Mark that way in the wake of the events of
as an
episode.
asshole, as Helly describes it. And
yeah,
I think that's reasonable, Patrick. But also, I think he is coping with being violated. He feels violated. He feels like he was in this situation under false pretenses, and so who knows how we would process that situation. But and he blames Helly, I think, to some degree, because it's not Helly, but it's some version of her.
You have her face.
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows how we would react in such an outlandish situation?
Yeah.
I don't judge. Anyway. Milchick takes the innies to their desk, but now they're configured in a three-way orientation. There's some really weird elements, like Irving has been photoshopped out of the group photo. Dylan requests a funeral for Irving, and Milchick readies a bereavement kit, which features these super cool personalized mugs and some printed out paper. Miss Huang points out the bereavement events are for innies who die on the severed floor, but Milchick points out the affections index for Irving B is in the high 60s. So therefore, he deserves a funeral.
Wait, hold on. So, and she's pointing out that there's something different between. She's calling a funeral for an innie that dies on the severed floor different than a retirement for an innie, right?
No, I think she's just saying or sorry, that's what I mean is it's for it's for retirement.
What I'm saying, all I'm saying is it is in the realm of possibility that you, Audi, created a severed innie, suffer a catastrophic heart attack on the innie floor,
right,
and then die without knowing. You just went down the elevator, and then if there's nothing on the other side, that's the last experience you have.
Yeah, I guess, but I think you're right. It's more like the Bert G thing that we saw last season, right?
Okay.
Where like everyone got around and like celebrated this guy. Kind of that's probably the kind of thing
Okay.
that she was talking about. But Miss Wong says they shouldn't have a funeral because it makes them feel like people. So she's really innieist, I guess is the word.
Well, I think this season in particular has gotten much sharper in the language that is used to describe, like this mostly comes from Helena, but I think she uses animals is
right.
like the word that she uses multiple times. And they sort of describe the innies as livestock adjacent, right? Like you're just husks to complete a task. And I think it's fascinating that, we have this other character that is also using that language, but it's not, this is a show in which like the corporate structure usually defines like how people, like how you, like, it's not Lumon saying these are inhuman animals. Like this is how we should treat, you know what I mean? Like people are given latitude to have empathy with the innies. That is not a corporate mandate down that you are not to view them as people necessarily. And I think that's fascinating how different folks sort of land on it and why they landed there.
Yeah, I think that's right. But it's just chilling to hear it come out of a little girl's mouth.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, all right. There is a funeral for Irving B. We see on the wall that Irving B was active from quarters 870 to 882, implying that there are assuming that there are 4 quarters per year and that the quarters have been continuous. This implies that Lumon is 217 years old. And that Irving B was there for 3 years. So anyway, just as FYI, there's not that many companies in general that are over 100 years old. I remember being at an all hands at Amazon once, and Jeff Bezos was musing about how whether it would be possible for Amazon to survive over 100 years. And it's just basically very difficult for companies to survive past 100 years. He said some of the few companies that have survived over 100 years are breweries, right? So anyway, take that for what you will. Maybe that's what is in that gigantic kind of liquid tower that you see. Lumon is a brewery.
It's just a double IPA. That's the secret to keeping Lumon going.
That's the whole thing. That would be actually really funny if that was the case.
That's one of their fronts.
Possible.
That's like possible. A Lumon, like Lumon Pilsner, just shipped out to the
That's
country.
what it is. That's what it is.
Is that what's? Maybe it's just an experimental goopy beer that's in Mark's little reintegration drinks.
He's refining the formula.
Yeah. Cold Harbor sounds like
Cold Harbor. That's right.
Beer.
It sounds like a beer. It's the new formula for the latest beer.
It's the seasonal Cold Harbor is back on tap. This whole show is just about refining one specific beer formula that was lost, to like a Lumon, like grandparent recipe that got water spilled on it.
That actually would be incredible because it would kind of be a big, like, not an FU, but it would just kind of be like, oh, all the theorizing that you're doing, all the like Reddit speculation. Guess what? It was all just a beer. You were wrong.
Get it? Beer? Kier? I mean, Dave, we're coming up with our own fan theories of the week. We're all in. Now, the thing we should have done was we should edit all these beer references out, then record a theory podcast where we're like very serious about it. Like, actually, beer, Kier, Cold Harbor, IPA. I'm sure we could figure out. Someone write in and like make that sound like much smarter. I feel like we can turn this into a legitimate theory and then go post it on the Severance like subreddit. Like let's get some traction on this.
Dylan gives a moving and hilarious eulogy. A watermelon sculpture with Irving's head carved into it is presented. Very chilling. And then Dylan tells Helly that Miss Casey is Mark's wife, and Helly confronts Mark, but he is really upset about the whole situation and upset that Helena has been spying on them. And Helly says she's not her, but Mark doesn't really feel like she can trust her just yet.
Well, and I like how much Dylan now feels, I think, empowered. Like Irving, like there's sort of like a rotating passing of the torch of like who is kind of an audience surrogate character, to function as like, just say the thing that we're all thinking. And like Irving has done a lot of that this season. Dylan is like a really like obvious, like next one up to just be like, just tell her what happened.
Yeah, she does. She has missed out on a lot of stuff that's happened.
She has. It's easy to forget. I mean, that's part of the genius of the show is because these actors playing both, like you can, it's easy as the audience, and I think the show plays on this, like to lose track of time, like sequence of events, who knows what, when did they learn it? And then once you factor in the jumps in time that can happen for the innies, especially, like, you know, where's the time to process such events? Like it's almost non-existent for them.
Yeah. Okay. What else happens? Dylan sees the poster on the wall that says "Hang in there," which were Irving's last words. It's a poster of Dylan himself activating the overtime contingency, holding the switches on the wall. Anyway, Irving has hidden something behind the poster, a drawing of the exports hall with instructions on the back of how to get to it. And Dylan puts the instructions back, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, then we go to Milchick's talent review. Milchick and Natalie have a brief check-in. He asks her what her reaction was to the paintings that he received, because he says, quote, "We face similar challenges." She declines to answer. I just want to comment on this real briefly and say I appreciate this because I think what this brings to light is this idea that, hey, these are two characters that are theoretically not white and therefore may have some shared experiences at Lumon, a place that feels overwhelmingly white. But the incentives are not really set up in a way for them to share and bond over their experience, basically. And in fact, quite the opposite. You know, it's possible that by sharing about their experiences, they can be penalized, which is, I think, one of the reasons why Natalie declines to open up about it. But I thought it was a very nice moment. I'm really curious if like it's building up to anything, or if it's just kind of the side commentary that the show is doing on race in the workplace.
I mean, I suspect. I mean, my like running theory at this point is that if we were assembling a list of characters that have grievances against Lumon, that would be helpful if you were going to do some subterfuge from within, like between Miss Cobell and Milchick. We have some people who are getting a little disillusioned with the Lumon fantasy. What are they getting out of it anymore? It's never quite clear, actually, like what were they getting out to begin with? Does Lumon just pay extraordinarily? Why jump through such extraordinary and often humiliating hoops for this company?
It's a good question. We get some insight into Milchick's talent review. He received Kier's paintings with grace. His attendance in urinalysis was great. You know, so those are like 3 big marks in his favor. Unfortunately, he had 3 contentions. 1, he uses too many big words. 2, on several daily logs, he put the paperclip in the wrong direction. And 3, what they spent most of their time talking about, the calamitous Ortbo, in which he tried to bring a new refining team for Mark S, and then the Ortbo resulted in the termination of one employee and the discovery of Helena Egan's identity.
Not great. That's not, even just from an outside observer, I got to admit, Milchick, great fit, but I don't, love the winter gear, but it's just, I don't know that this worked out how you wanted.
I really appreciated this talent review because I think that often at talent reviews, it is difficult to know how things are weighted, right? Like you will often get presented like, you did this well, you did this well, you did this well, you did this poorly, you did this poorly, but you don't really have a sense of how they weigh on the ultimate impact on your career.
How seriously are you supposed to take any of this? At every stop I have had, it is just HR mandated nonsense that I am told privately on the sly. Like, because oftentimes you're filling things out, like filling out a form that produced discussion points to talk about during a review. And then we get to the review and it's mostly just like, how you doing? Like, oh no, we're not talking about the questions. Like, it's not like none of that has been like actually impactful or cared about by like the editors I have worked with. I'm sure that is, but everywhere I've worked has been often been at companies, but not as hierarchical as as an Amazon or something like that at the level that I'm working within. So I've never had to ever take seriously any of these reviews. I've always just been told it's just something we have to do we would let you know if we had a problem, and it wouldn't come up in a performance review necessarily. It would come up when it was actually an issue.
Right. I mean, I think what is great about this sequence is it kind of illustrates how ridiculous it is to even be bringing these two things up in the same context. Like
Yes.
paper clips versus somebody almost dying, right? Like why are those even in the same conversation? Because if they're in the same conversation, it's like it implies that they should have not necessarily equal weight, but weight that is like related to each other in some way. When in reality, like one is obviously far greater than the other, and that's often true of like actual corporate reviews too. Of like you don't know like how should you weight these things, how important are any of these things? It's all quite opaque in general, and so I think that this sequence brings that to life. We do get some insight into Cold Harbor. We learn that Mark S's completion of Cold Harbor will be remembered as one of the greatest moments on the history of this planet. Again, no actual commentary on what it is, which kind of makes you think like, is there actually a thing?
Mm-hmm.
Is it beer? Is it nothing? Is it cloning? Is it Keir Egan's reincarnation? Who knows?
Hold on, that could be our commercial slogan for is it beer? No, it's Keir. And then
Not bad.
Come on.
Not
Come
bad.
on.
You missed out on your true calling.
I know.
But anyway, Drummond basically says to Milchick, you gotta bear down harder on these severed people. Get them to work. Like, stop being so merciful and kind to them. They're basically not really people.
Well, and there's a specific exchange where, part of the reason they got this far was Miss Cobell being much stricter about what was going on, and he was sort of kind of this anxiety release valve that she had in the structure of the severed floor. And he makes a point to like, well, I'm not her. And I think that's one of those like there's obviously when he asks about the paintings, like it's a couple of moments where we get to scratch at the real Milchick a little bit, which really I think lends credence to my argument that I think by the end he's going to be working with the severed floor to undermine Lumon. But I think by the end of the season is where I think this character is going.
They have a confrontation. Milchick and Mark S have a confrontation on the severed floor. Mark leaves 6 minutes early. Milchick's unhappy with that. He's basically like, let's put all these things behind us, but Mark is really not having it. Mark calls Milchick out on giving him a fake newspaper, which is something that happened in episode 1 of season 2. And then Milchick says, did you tell Helly that you fucked her outie at the Ortbo? Which is like, I don't know, man. Not appropriate. Not appropriate for a boss to ask that question for an employee.
HR.
Can you imagine though, like you're like a mid-level supervisor at this company, and like the CEO's daughter, who's the heir to the company, is like in love with one of your employees, but like the innie version of her. It's just like such a weird.
Yeah. It's I think what's so like striking about that scene is just it's two characters like with their personalities dialed in a direction. Like we've seen Mark be an ass in this episode, but directed like understandably like in confusion, working through trauma, like directed at some of of his friends on the floor and how he feels about them. But like he really turns it up to 11 with Milchick, and then Milchick, who he can be strict, he can be he's a lot of things. He's a very stoic sort of character. We've rarely he bites his lip before. He's rarely mean because he always seems like the character like walks up to a line, bites his lip, puts on a smile, and then says something a little quippy before walking away in his own version of quippiness. But here, I mean, he takes that. It seems like he then positions himself as like, well, actually, these people, again, that question of are they people or are they animals? Well, I don't know how Milchick personally feels. I think he actually thinks the innies are people and should be treated with respect, but he's going to cross that line for the moment to try and keep them in line. And I suspect that is going to have some pretty immediate consequences.
Yeah, we will see. We'll see. But he clearly is now at the point where he feels like his job is on the line. He's got to get these people into shape. So that's what he's doing in a display of dominance. I want to give a shout out to some of the framing in Severance season 2, episode 5. There are a couple of shots of two people in dialogue with each other that are really impressive. One is early on the episode when Helly and Mark are talking. They're in the Lumon hallway, and you see like a shot of the two of them side by side, wide shot, and Mark's face is slightly obscured by the wall and it's out of focus. I don't know if you remember that shot.
Yeah.
But it kind of signifies like his state of mind. Like he's very cloudy on what is actually happening, who he should trust, whether he can trust LAR. Meanwhile, LAR is in the same shot. She's crystal clear, totally in focus. And that's because she is extremely activated by what has occurred. Similarly, Mark is in the elevator with Milchick, and there's like a physical line that you see, like the corner of the elevator that divides the two of them. And then at one point, Milchick breaches that line, like he crosses the line and gets into Mark's personal space. Anyway, I just thought it's brilliant framing to indicate the dynamics of these characters and their state of mind in these moments of the show. Okay, few things happen on the outside. We see Devin and Ricken. Devin is reading an excerpt from the book The UUR, an updated version for Lumon innies. It's all about subjugating workers, and thus the opposite of what Ricken was trying to accomplish. And Devin is really unhappy with it. And Ricken is saying, maybe this could be my Trojans Horse, a way to smuggle in my ideas into the group, into the innies, and start a revolution. And she's like, but they're not your ideas. They're actually horrifying. It's about how the boss is awesome and you should be happy. And at that point, Ricken says, this is a fiscal and creative opportunity, the likes of which I've never seen. So it's like,
he also calls Nat. Like there is a,
yeah, that's right.
And there's a moment when she comes to visit them and they're talking about this project. They are in incredibly close proximity to one another. Like they are sitting next to each other, like one on either two chairs and one on a chair and a couch. It's not romantic or intimate, but it is shot with an intimacy that I think is meant to sort of indicate what we see then have like a fracturing between like partners over decisions that are being made here, especially about how they feel about Lumon, about the innies, which is, illustrated here as well.
Yeah, and it's all about the compromises you make when you decide to get paid by a massive corporation, right? It's like, okay, we will buy your work, we will pervert your work, we will use your work to subjugate our workers, but you get paid a lot. And it's like the alternative in Ricken's situation is, I don't know that sales of the UUR are going super great. So it's like, what do you do in that situation? It's tough. He's got a family. He's got mouths to feed. I didn't think Ricken would be somebody whose journey I'd be invested in, but I'm a little bit invested in it now. So,
well, I think I'm invested, especially insofar as what that means. Again, I think you're seeing all these like divisions made between characters, alliances, their feelings on Lumon, and those are just sort of getting calcified and like greater as the season goes along. And I expect that we're like, this is not a subplot that is just off to the side. Like I expect her really sharp feelings on all of this. And I mean, look, her husband's doing propaganda for Lumon while she's also like, like helping like burn the retinas of like a family member to try and communicate with them inside. That is just not, that's not tenable. Like that can't sustain.
Indeed. I do want to point out that Apple has recently released a ebook version of the UUR available for your reading. It's highly entertaining. You can go to like iBooks and get it. It's only the first octet of chapters, so only the first 8 chapters. But it's very cool that they did this. It's very plausible that this is the book, the UUR. Patrick Klepek, I'm going to read a little bit from it. I'll read here from the introduction. A book begins. That's the name of the introduction. It's said that as a child, Wolfgang Mozart killed another boy by slamming his head in a piano. Don't worry, my research for this book has proven the claim untrue. As your heart rate settles, though, consider the power an author, which we'll refer to as me, can hold over a reader, heretofore called you. But what indeed is you? How can you mean different things to millions of readers around a vast earth? And perhaps most importantly, who are you? I'm not asking out of mere politeness, for you, my friend, are no mere consumer of this book, sucking down nouns and adverbs like a plump babe to the teat. In fact, your relationship to this work is far more intimate and profound. You are its subject. The gentle snow of dandruff I sense dusting the pages informs me you're scratching your head. Hold the phone, you scoff aloud. Me? I'm the subject of Dr. Ricken's new book? Yeah, right. In my dreams, maybe. End quote. Anyway, it goes on like that for a while, but it nails the tone. It's very entertaining. You should check it out. The You Are, available right now from Apple. What else happens in the outside world? Irving B looks at his paintings of the exports hall in his Audi, looks at the paintings of the exports hall. He goes to this phone booth. He makes a call to an unknown person. He says on the phone, "They fired me. I think they knew what my innie was up to." Who is he talking to? Ragabi, maybe? Some other person?
How does he know what his innie is up to?
Right. Like,
you don't say up to unless you have suspicions about your innie.
Yeah.
Maybe that's related to the paintings, clearly this, I don't know, but
I mean, there's an open question of like, how does Irving know what the exports hall looks like?
Right.
Theoretically, that's the only information his innie might have access to, and even then his innie has no clear way of knowing that.
Right.
So, anyway, Bert G
multiple
sees him.
multiple innies? Like, could you have gone through an innie outie process multiple times, creating different versions of yourselves that work in different parts of Lumon?
Yeah, different partitions. I think that's very possible.
Mm-hmm.
Bert G sees him and confronts him, explains what he knows about their history. He says, like, my innie had an unsanctioned erotic entanglement with another worker. So this is the first time we find out that that's why Bert G was fired. I don't think we knew that before, if I'm not mistaken. But also we learned that Bert G has a husband named Fields, and he invites Irving over for dinner. So they're going to presumably talk about lots of weird stuff at that dinner. Finally, we have a scene with Ragabi, who's sorting through Mark and Gemma's things. There's a box that has Gemma's ashes. Unclear who that is in the ash box, but Ragabi says they know people at the morgue and they pay them off, so that's probably where. But Mark wants to know, like, are they hurting her? And Ragabi doesn't know. Mark then starts seeing visions of his innie's life going through the hallway. He sees Miss Casey in the hallway at Lumon, and the episode comes to an end. So, some scenes from the outside at the end of this week's episode of Severance. Patrick Klepek, any closing thoughts on the episode?
Yeah, I'm glad they're slow playing the reintegration stuff. I think that it's going to be, if this show is ultimately about a Mark and the acceptance of loss over his wife, like, I think this reintegration process is going to be like a huge emotional arc for this character as they work through whatever's going on with Miss Gemma and all that within Lumon. But I found that little sequence to be, like, especially after he looks at these ashes that he thinks is his wife, and then has a strange vision of an experience his innie had within the halls of Lumon, is I expect him for not only some trippy visuals, but some like really powerful emotional moments as these two different versions of himself reconcile, or with however Severance chooses to end up portraying what reintegration looks like when it settles.
Yeah, season 1 really was about grief in a lot of ways, and we kind of have lost that thread a little bit in season 2. So I am wondering, how much we're going to tie back into that in season 2. But anyway, solid episode, really nice moments, look spectacular as usual. Some things kind of answered, some plots kind of moved along, but I expect we'll see a lot more happening in next week's episode of Severance. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.